Now, it's one of Britain's most notorious murder cases. In 1986, Jeremy Bamber was found guilty of killing 5 members of his own family.
Almost 35 years on, the harrowing story is being retold in a new 6-part ITV drama starring actors Freddie Fox and Mark Addy.
But before we find out more, here's a first look at what you can expect. Oh,
looks amazing.
Chilling.
Freddie Fox and Mark Addy, who play Jeremy Bamber and DS Stan Jones, join us now. There's a summary here of the actual case itself. White House Farm murders took place in the village of Tolson-Darcy in Essex during the night of the 6th and 7th of August 1985. Married couple Neville and June Bamber were shot, killed inside the farmhouse, along with their adopted daughter, Sheila Cathal, Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons, Daniel and Nicholas. The only surviving member was Neville's immediate family, was their adopted son, Jeremy Bamber, who was then 24 years old. Police initially thought that Sheila, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, had murdered her whole own family before turning the gun on herself, but investigating officer DS Stan Jones had doubts about the murder-suicide story. So that's where that story begins, and it is a story you remember breaking.
I do. I remember it. I'd just left drama school in the mid-'80s, and I remember seeing Jeremy Bamber at the funeral and feeling uneasy about the way he was behaving.
Really?
And watching Freddie play that scene in our drama brought all that flooding back. I was just not convinced by me personally. I was not convinced by his. The way Bamber behaved, but the way there were mistakes made by the police in this investigation. They chalked it down as murder-suicide, so the crime scene was not kept forensically intact. So people were literally wandering in and out through puddles of blood, and nothing was stuff was being moved. It changed the way police procedure is done in cases like this, for the better.
And so, Freddie, for you, because, you know, this was in the 80s, there is footage like that. There is footage of the funeral. There's books that have been written about it. There's all the sort of transcripts from the interviews, police interviews. There was an awful lot of research material for you to sort of get hold of.
Yeah, there was, and you feel certainly duty-bound to get through as much of it as you possibly can. Because real people are involved here, and there are, you know, surviving victims. And so I went to Colin Cafell's sort of brilliant, I wouldn't, memoir's not the right word, but retrospective of what happened and his process of grief and grieving and getting through that, called In Search of the Rainbow's End. And Carol Ann Lee's very sort of meticulously researched book, The Murders at White House Farm. That was my starting point. I then went and talked to criminal psychologists and officials that were connected with the case. I listened to Jeremy Bamber's voice quite a lot, just to get little sort of tics and isms right, you know, not a direct imitation as such. But yes, it was a fairly replete sort of and broad research package.
Well, you're lucky to the point, really, because you mentioned Colin Cafell there, that he hadn't in the past ever wanted to get involved with any of these things. This is the first time that he wanted to get involved with your adaptation.
Indeed. I mean, I think, understandably, I think Colin has been very resistant to something like this being made. And I think so probably sort of, you know, still, it's retelling that moment for a public audience is difficult for him. However, I think he knew that this team were going to tell it right. ITV's heritage of doing these kind of dramas really, really well is very, very strong. And he was so supportive to me personally and to the entire group in order that we got this absolutely right.
And Mark, for you, I mean, DS Stan Jones, sadly, he passed away in 2014, so you weren't able to speak to him. But you've said before that moment in filming, when you walked into the crime scene for the first time, you really got an understanding of what that moment must have been like for him, witnessing that horror.
That's right. It's, you know, in our version of the story, I'm literally arriving at the crime scene to tell my boss, I've spoken to this Bamber guy, everything seems fine, let's carry on. And because he's not there to meet me, I have to pop in and see if I can find him. And in the course of that, spot what has gone on in this place and the feeling that A, something's not quite right about what my boss is telling me, and B, just the idea of the idea of seeing that scene, and particularly the boys, and going, we need to get this right.
Well,
We need to
that was
solve
his
this
passion,
right.
because as a detective, he was absolutely determined to get to the truth, wasn't he?
Yeah, and he had to break the rules and go over his boss's head in order to get his voice heard. So he ultimately received no other than a cup of tea and a pat on the back from the big boss. There was no real recognition of what Stan had done in order to get this case solved, because he'd broken the rules.
Freddie Bamber is in prison. He still claims that he is innocent in all of this. There was talk of you possibly reaching out to speak to him, and it wasn't something that you wanted to explore.
I mean, I should make it clear at the beginning of the show, you said I turned down an opportunity to meet him. I didn't. I didn't turn down an opportunity. I never made an approach. I decided to do that in conjunction with my director and a criminal psychologist who I was talking to and consulting. And we decided that it probably wouldn't be beneficial for a number of reasons. And so we didn't decide to go down that route. And as you say, there's so much factual material there, not just, video footage of scenes like the funeral and audio footage I could use. It wasn't going to add much.
And when
to
you
my
study
creation.
that funeral footage of him, because, I mean, although at the time, you say when you were watching it, you weren't convinced, but there were moments where you thought, actually, it was a convincing display of emotion. And
well, I think certainly my Jeremy Bamber had to, for the sake of the drama, be as plausible as possible for as long as possible. If, it depends on what you believe, of course, but, we have to keep the audience asking the question all the time and make him an enigmatic figure.
We've got another clip here. This is part of the interrogation between the two characters. There is a real responsibility to get it right, isn't there, as well?
There is, and Mark Stanley there playing Colin Caffell, who not only lost his ex-wife and 2 sons, but then had the tabloid press in their salacious way, oh, she's an ex-model, maybe she was involved in drugs, and maybe she was... So there was a whole kind of character assassination that he had to face as well. So, there is a responsibility to him and to get this
and I
right.
think that's an important thing for Colin. It's an opportunity to somewhat clear the air and make sure the facts as they were are told properly. Because there's been so much clutter and salacious driftwood around this case that it's worth seeing something that has that tells the story as it happened.
As it happened, yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating. It's at White House Farm, ITV, Wednesday the 8th at 9 p.m. And thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.